Okay, so good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar, The Holistic Approach to Skin Health. I'm really excited to help share this information with you. Just as a quick background, I am Brian Sanderoff. I'm a regularly trained pharmacist, used to own my own pharmacy, actually two pharmacies in downtown Baltimore at one point. And at some point in my career, I realized that giving people prescription medicines to help them with their chronic issues was not really helping them. What we do in medicine with the prescription medicines, and this is true for every one of the chronic diseases, is not really fix problems. All we do is slow or turn down the volume of how the body is talking to us. And that's the case with anything chronic: blood pressure, diabetes, cholesterol, osteoporosis, depression, even some cancers. And we'll talk about some of those today. Really, those are just very intricate ways that the body's trying to give us a message. And in medicine, we don't listen to that message. We just turn the volume down. So just like if you're driving around in your car and you see that little oil light, that little red light on your dashboard illuminate, you have a couple choices. If you want, you can just take the car to the mechanic and find out what's wrong and get it fixed. Or you could just take a piece of black tape and put it over the light, and then you don't see the indicator anymore. And that's what we do in medicine. And so the work that I do is really dedicated to helping educate people about the ramifications of the decisions that they make, and then help them support making new decisions if they want. Now, there are a lot of misconceptions and there is a lot of misinformation out there from medicine, from our government, from doctors and nurses and newspapers that really are inaccurate. And so we sometimes make decisions based on faulty information. And of course, then we have ramifications that happen as a result of that faulty information. One of those would be about fat in our diet. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail later. But, for years now, we've been told that we should not have fat in our diet. We should be on low fat diets. And nothing could be further from the truth. And the result of having a low fat diet, which also means having a high sugar diet, is one of the results is the level of chronic disease that we have today. And so what today is about is helping to educate you about your health, and today in particular about your skin health, so that way you can make more informed decisions for yourself. And so let's go ahead and get started. And again, I just want to remind you, if you have a question as we're going through this, please don't hesitate to type that right into the box, and I will get that and be able to respond to it. And then also, I want to point out that today's webinar is being recorded, as every one of my webinars are, and by the beginning of next week, it will show up on our website, wellbeinggps.com, in our webinar archives. And so I've been doing these webinars for about 2 years now, and they're all recorded. There's a lot of topics in there. And so I would encourage you, one, to go check out the list and listen to other webinars, and then also to share that information, including what's happening today. Also, I will be doing this webinar that you are hearing now live again on Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So anybody that you want to share this information with, let them know, and they can get signed up and listen to it live as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So I want to start off with a little bit of biology about the skin. And, sometimes I apologize for how in-depth we have to get into things, but really this is about education. And what I'm going over with you now is important to understand how the skin functions, so that you can then affect the function of the skin or interpret the dysfunction of your skin more appropriately. So here we go. Number one, your skin is probably the largest and the most underappreciated organ that you have. If you spread out your skin, it would be about the size of a twin bed, and it usually weighs about 8 pounds. The skin will vary in thinness and thickness depending on where it is in the body. And so on the eyelids and around the eyes, that is the thinnest skin that you have, and the thickest is usually on the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. So one of the reasons why we generally see aging of the skin happen first around the eyes is because that's where it's thinnest. And so that's where we have a tendency to first see wrinkles and crow's feet and that kind of thing. There are 2 layers of the skin. It's called the epidermis, and then it's called the dermis. And they have different functions, and they're separated by what's called the basement membrane. And then underneath those 2 layers of skin, there's your subcutaneous. So here's a little picture of what it looks like, and you can see that there's the surface of the skin, and this top area is called the epidermis. It actually can be broken down into 5 sub levels, but we don't need to get that involved in it. And then there's the dermis, which is the lower part, and that's where you'll see a lot of the structures of the skin are. And then underneath is the subcutaneous layer, and we'll talk about all those 3 things. So let's talk about the epidermis at first. Now, number one, it is the outermost layers. It's actually 5 sublayers, as I said, and it has some specific functions that it does for us. So number one, it keeps water in and pathogens out. One of the functions of the skin is protection. Protection from the outside world and protection from losing what's on the inside world. It also provides mechanical strength and to the skin. Also want to point out that there are no blood vessels in the epidermis, in this upper level of skin. And what happens is cells migrate from the deeper parts to the surface as they change function, and then they die, and then they get sloughed off, and new ones sort of replace it. And so it's a constant sort of dance of cells working their way towards the surface through those 5 sub-levels. They have function as they do that, and eventually the skin becomes dead and it's on the surface, and then you slough that skin off, and new cells replace what got sloughed off. And that's a really important way that the body works, working from the inside out. The lower layer of the skin is called the dermis, and again, certain functions. It provides strength and elasticity in particular to the skin. It's important to know that because what happens as we get older? Well, our skin loses its elasticity and it gets weaker instead of stronger. All of the structures of the skin are really located in this area. So we're talking about things like the nerve endings and the hair follicles and the sweat glands and the sebaceous glands and lymph vessels and blood vessels. All are in this lower part of the skin. The sebaceous glands in specific I want to talk about. Sebum, S-E-B-U-M, is the oily substance that covers practically the entire body, and it provides a barrier keeping fluid from escaping from the body and a barrier keeping bacteria and microbes out of the body. The pores that sebum and sweat come from can become clogged, and this oftentimes is the cause of acne, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And it's interesting to note that these glands are more common on the face, on the back, on the chest, and in the groin area. And of course, those are the areas that we have a tendency to have problems with if we are having problems with acne, right? Okay, and then there's the subcutaneous tissue, and that's the one that sits right below the dermis. And that's sort of the barrier between the dermis and the rest of the body. And in your subcutaneous tissue, that provides, again, strength and elasticity to the skin. And also, 50% of the body's fat is stored in this area, and it provides padding and insulation. That's why we have that fat there in the first place. Again, going back to caveman times when we lived more in the elements and not as much food was available during the winter. This was a store of energy and of insulation and padding against the cold. So here's a really important fact to understand, and that is that microorganisms live on the surface of the skin. This is really important to know. And think about how often we interfere with the bacteria that are on our skin, because we've got it into our heads that we need to live. This is one of those misinformation things, that we're supposed to live in a sterile environment. And so we use all of these antibacterial soaps and, clothes and lotions and all this kind of stuff. And it actually ends up being a mistake. The density of the bacteria on the skin will vary depending on where we're talking about on the body. And it's also important to understand that when the skin is disinfected, meaning that we've done something to get rid of the bacteria, the skin surface will get recolonized from bacteria living deep in the hair follicles, but also from the urogenital openings and from the gut. Really, really important. And this will become important later when we're talking about skin dysfunction. Gut function and skin function are very closely related. Aileen was asking, will you share the recordings of this webinar? Yes. The recording will be on our website by early next week. And then it's the whole thing. It's this live presentation along with the PowerPoint presentation. And then you can listen to it anytime you want. Thanks, Aileen. Appreciate that. Okay, so let's talk about the functions of the skin. Number one is protection. And so this means protection from mechanical impact and pressure, again, from the outside world. It means protection from microorganisms. Um, Important to point out that many immune factors reside in the skin, and the skin will signal and activate the immune system if entry by a microorganism is detected when it shouldn't be, right? Also, protection from radiation. So we're talking about the sun here, right? Melanin is a pigment that is produced by specific cells within the skin. And that's what actually provides color to our skin. There are genetic factors and hormonal factors that will determine the color of each of our skins. And even people who are related, meaning brothers and sisters who have the same genes from their parents, can have different skin tones, right? Melanin is also produced in response to sun exposure. And so that actually is the process of tanning. When you get systematic exposure to the sun, what happens to our skin as the summer wears on? It actually gets darker, and that's the body creating this melanin, to help protect us. The darker your skin is, the more protected you are from the sun. And then also chemicals, right? Another function of the skin is that of regulation. So we're talking about body temperature. So blood vessels will contract or expand depending upon the temperature outside of the body. If it's cold out, the blood vessels will constrict so that it helps to retain heat in the body. And if it's hot out, the blood vessels near the surface of the skin will expand, allowing for the release of some heat. And then other things, fluid balance, vitamin D, very important. The skin, stores vitamin D. And then when it comes to regulation, also about toxins. And we don't often think about our skin as an organ of elimination, but actually that is one of the very important functions. If other forms or other ways that the body looks to eliminate things that don't belong in the body, talking about liver and kidney and bowel function and lung function to an extent, if those things aren't doing the job, sometimes the body will resort to using the skin as an organ of elimination. And that's important to understand. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more detail further in the presentation when it comes to talking about some of the dysfunctions of skin. And then the skin has the function of sensation, and we all know that. We detect cold or heat or touch or pain or texture through our skin as well, and that is really, really important to an important function. That's one of the ways that we interact with our environment and know what's happening in our environment and know how to interact appropriately. So I want to talk a little bit about skin aging here because this is one of the bigger concerns that we have. This is one of the functions that doesn't seem to go well with many of us, and one of the prime reasons why we make certain decisions and use a lot of products out there. There are a lot of products that are purported to help you with the aging of your skin. I think there's a lot of misinformation there, and some of that information drives us to spend a lot of money and spend a lot of time supposedly doing things that are healthy for our skin or to help avoid the aging of skin that really doesn't help. So let's talk about it a little bit. First of all, we want to point out that as we age, there's slower cell production. I had talked about that process where cells start in the deeper levels and they work their way up and they change in function as they work their way up. Part of that is to help the skin work properly, to maintain its elasticity, to maintain its structure and its strength. And of course, one of the things that happens as we get older is we lose elasticity and our skin isn't as strong. And so this is happening in the epidermis, in that upper part. When we're born and when we're younger, we produce new skin cells. And then as we get older, this happens more and more slowly. And this is somewhat controlled genetically as well. So we have some genetic triggers or some genetic tendencies that can affect that process. But when we're younger, those skin cells, we can actually be 20 cells deep for the thickness of our skin in the upper part. And as we get older, it can get as low or as small as 2 cells deep. So again, that's why we can see our skin aging. Part of this process has to do with changes in protein. The body makes less collagen and elastin. These are two very important proteins that the skin produces as we age. And the elastin can lose some of its strength, and that's what leads to thinner and saggier skin as we get older. And of course, there are some external factors that affect skin aging as well. Smoking is one of them. Now, why does smoking affect skin function? Well, it actually causes a change. The nicotine and other components of cigarette smoke, of tobacco smoke, actually change circulation within the skin. And when that happens, you deliver less oxygen and nutrition to the skin. Skin cells can't reproduce as appropriately. So smoking, not just with the face, but all over the body, actually affects your aging. Overexposure to the sun is another external factor that can play a role with skin aging. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't get exposure to the sun. And I'm going to talk about that in a lot more detail when we talk about melanomas and those dangerous skin cancers. But overexposure or inappropriate exposure to the sun causes aging as well. And we've seen that. I'm sure you've seen people that have spent a lot of time in the sun, especially men or women that are on boats, and they're always in the sun, and the sun's always reflecting off the water, and you see the back of their necks looks like leather, right? That's classic aging of the skin. So let's talk a little bit about nourishing the skin. What can we do to actually nourish the skin? Well, issue number one is moisture. And so we need to get moisture into the skin, and none of us drink enough water. The rule of thumb is that you should drink half of your body weight in pounds in ounces of water. So if you're like me and you weigh, 200 pounds, that means that I should be drinking a minimum of 100 ounces of water every day. I do it, and it takes work to make sure that you do that. And so do that little calculation for yourself, however many pounds you are, divide that in half, and that's how many ounces of water you should drink every single day. And I also want to talk about healthy fats, because this is where that misinformation that we get from medicine and from our society really can affect health, in particular skin health. Because one of the things that helps moisturize skin from the inside out are healthy fats. I'm talking about fish oil. So here are the facts. You cannot really moisturize the skin from the outside in. Now think about that. The skin actually sets up a barrier keeping the outside world out, and that includes moisture as well. And you cannot really moisturize the skin from the outside in. And think about that also in regards to how the skin functions and this little dance that the skin does, where cells are constantly working their way from deeper to the surface where they die and then get sloughed off. And so if the surface of the skin are these dead cells, you can't get through that. I mean, that's one of the functions of the skin. And so all of these products that we put on our skin supposedly to help moisturize from the outside in really doesn't work that way. The best that you can do is help to create a barrier that slows the evaporation of moisture from the skin. So anything that's oil-based, like Vaseline intensive care, you're not really moisturizing. That oil or that Vaseline is not working its way into the skin, but what you have done probably is set up an effective barrier that slows the evaporation of moisture from the surface of the skin. And remember that many nutrients don't get absorbed through the skin either unless they're in a special form. And so this idea of having these skin creams with all of these high-priced nutrients in them probably do not give us protection the way that we've been led to believe. Jaden had a question, what about the absorption of water? I've heard that it needs to have some mineral or electrolyte salt in order to actually absorb into the cells. And that's probably true, or that could be helpful with it. And we can absorb certain chemicals from our skin, um, and even some nutrients. Like I had done a webinar a couple months ago about vitamin K, iodine, and how important that is. And one of the reasons why we feel healthier when we go to the shore is that actually we absorb iodine that gets aerolized through the action of waves in the ocean. We actually absorb that through our skin, but most vitamins and minerals we don't. And just remember, one of the major purposes of the skin is to keep the outside world out, and that includes most of the things that we would put on our skin as well. Aileen was asking, it's just wondering about nutrients, about absorbing nutrients from the skin. So there you go. All right. So just think about all of those skin products that have all of those fancy nutrients in it, and we sort of given the impression that they absorb into the skin and they protect it. Probably doesn't. The best way to take care of your skin is from the inside out. So moisture is factor number one. Number two is protein. And so I want to point out that the number one marker of aging, and this isn't just getting old and getting chronic disease, but the number one marker of aging when it comes to skin health as well is loss of muscle mass. As we get older, it's actually our own muscle that the body uses as a source of protein. Now remember, I told you that the skin makes a couple of really important proteins, elastin and collagen. And if you don't have the materials to build, the factory workers can't do their building. You know, you can't build a house without bricks and mortar. And so even though you may have ready and able workers, if they don't have the materials, they can't do the building. And so we want to make sure that as we get older, we actually exercise, and we exercise our muscles so that we keep up our muscle mass. And then there's dietary protein as well. Another factor that happens as we get older is we produce less hydrochloric acid in our stomach, and that's one of the major ways that we break down dietary proteins. And if we don't break our dietary proteins down into the individual amino acids, our body can't use those to build and repair, including making collagen and elastin and many other important proteins within our body. And so oftentimes, not just making sure that you're getting enough protein in your diet, but also that you have the proper mechanism to break that protein down. So one of the things that you can do that will actually help skin health and nourish the skin is to take a plant-based digestive enzyme when you eat, so that you get better use of the proteins that you have in your diet. And then using a protein shake or some sort of protein supplement also can be helpful. Aileen is asking, what about chemicals then in body products? Aren't they absorbed? They can, depending on what the body products are, because sometimes the things that are in these body products are there to enhance absorption of things. And in fact, some of them have mechanisms that in one way actually break down the barrier and ultimately the function of the skin to allow other things in. And that is not a good thing, because, as you said, sometimes there can be chemicals in there that your body can absorb. And for example, your body absorbs chlorine. So when you are in a pool, you actually get some absorption of chlorine through your skin as well. And to some extent, even just taking a shower. And so using products that are cleaner as far as those chemicals is probably a good idea as well. Tara had a question. Oh, sorry, she has to leave. She's saying, yeah. So Tara, again, come to the website, and you will after Monday, and you will see a recording of this so that you can get the rest of it as well. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. Okay, so other things that are important for nourishing the skin. Sleep, really, really important. Collagen production, again, that really important protein, kicks into high gear when we sleep. And so that idea of beauty sleep actually has some science behind it. When you are properly getting sleep, you are helping to make your collagen work, properly, or get made properly. And collagen can help reduce moisture loss from the skin. It's one of the purposes of collagen. And then lastly, stress, because stress causes changes in blood flow, including blood flow to the skin. And so that affects the ability to get oxygen and nutrition and all that sort of stuff as well. Um, Causes nutritional, changes in nutritional status throughout the whole body, and also causes changes in gut function. And I would refer you to the webinar that I did about stress for more information about this. But stress affects gut function in a really, really intimate way. And it's really important to understand that gut function and skin function are, practically one and the same. So here's the important message from this, interpreting what skin problems really, really mean. So it's important to understand that what is happening on the skin is often a very, very accurate reflection of what is happening on the inside of your body. So, we have a tendency to look at the skin as being on the outside. And if we're having a problem on the skin, we just treat the skin without thinking about the inside. And what I'm here to tell you is that the first thing you should think of if you are having some sort of problem on your skin is what's going on inside of my body that this is a reflection of. Because if you really want to have that problem go away and go away for good and go away properly, you have to treat the inside of your body. So an example of that would be when we were talking about gut function. Because you're supposed to have certain bacteria that are on your skin, and when they're not there, your skin can't work appropriately. And that can show up in all sorts of different ways, including acne or dry skin or psoriasis. And one of the ways to fix that is actually to balance your gut with a good bacteria, to actually take a probiotic or a good bacteria formula. All right, so let's get into some of the common issues that happen on the skin and maybe different ways to interpret what that means and then how to treat it. And we'll go through a couple of them that I think are kind of important and are common. And again, happy to try to answer your questions as well. Okay, so number one, let's talk about dry skin. And I'm talking about anything from eczema to psoriasis to, just a dry skin condition. The thing to remember is that this is saying that the skin does not have enough moisture. And we want to moisturize the skin from the inside out. Now, here's a common occurrence that, for example, gets misunderstood or not treated appropriately that is related to the healthy fats and its relation to skin moisture, and dry skin. Let's say that for some reason, whether it was warranted or not, you had to have your gallbladder removed. If that's so, then what we've done in medicine maybe have saved your life, but also have interfered with your body's ability to absorb fats from your diet. And commonly, the result of that is all of a sudden people, 6 months, a year, 2 years after having their gallbladder removed, notice that their skin is getting dry and flaky and scaly, and maybe they start to get things like psoriasis or eczema or whatever. And it's all related to lack of healthy fats. How about women who are pregnant or who are nursing? Oftentimes, under that situation, when you turn your body into a factory, the baby gets first rights to all the healthy fats, and it's sort of enough to push you into a healthy fat or a healthy fatty acid deficiency. And oftentimes, the first sign of that is dry skin. So, lack of healthy fats happens for a lot of reasons. One of them is the result of that quote unquote medical advice that says that we should be on a low fat diet. We should not be on a low fat diet. And fat in your diet does not relate to you being overweight. Sugar in your diet leads to being overweight. And if you're eating a food that says low fat, you should avoid it, because low fat means high sugar. And that's really the risk factor for many, many chronic diseases, including skin issues. So low fat is bad, but balanced fat is good. And that's what we want. We do not want to be on a low fat diet. What we want to be is on a balanced fat diet. When I say balanced, what I'm talking about, you can kind of think of fats in two ways. There are fats that lead to inflammation, And there are fats that work against inflammation, and they're supposed to be in a certain balance. Now, the fats that are pro-inflammatory, that lead to inflammation, are the fats that come from all of those vegetable oils that we have in our diet. Somewhere back in the 50s, we learned that if you cook food and pastries in this, vegetable fats, sunflower, safflower, canola oils, that it makes them just taste all crispy and that leads to inflammation. Anti-inflammatory fats are known as omega-3 fats, and they come from certain vegetable sources like flax or walnut, but the vast majority of us should be getting them from fish. And what nature intended for us to get in our diets was anywhere from a 1-to-1 ratio to a 2-to-1 ratio of pro to anti-inflammatory fats. But what do we get in today's standard American diet? Anywhere from 15 to 30 to 1. And that's why we have all this chronic disease, including issues with our skin. And so you don't want to cut down on the fat in your diet. You just want to shift it. And the way you do that is with supplements. You start taking fish oil as a supplement. So Aileen is asking if I can talk about the balance of 3, 6, and 9. And that's exactly right. Imbalances between those can also cause hormonal problems as well. So it used to be that when we ate an animal from the wild, it would have a certain ratio of pro to anti-inflammatory fats. That's when that animal ate the way nature intended. But the animals that we eat today, meaning if you're eating chicken or beef, they don't eat the way nature intended. For instance, a cow is fed corn. Why? Because that gets it to market weight much sooner so that, the owner of the cow can sell it to us. But what's in that corn? Corn oil. And so it actually changes the ratio of fats within that animal. And then when we eat that animal, that's what messed up our ratio, as well as I said, all of those vegetable oils that we get. So you definitely want to have those fats in balance. And if you have a dry skin condition, one of the ways to interpret that is to say, wait a second, my fats are likely out of balance. There's also hidden food sensitivities, and this is where the body is resorting to use the skin as an organ of elimination. That's one of the things that can sort of dry the skin out. So dry, flaky skin and psoriasis and eczema can be the result of eating foods that your body cannot digest and wants to get rid of. The biggest culprit here, probably gluten. And gluten is it's a protein that's in certain grains: wheat, oat, rye, kamut, spelt, barley. And if you have a chronic skin issue, including dry skin or eczema, psoriasis, and acne, we'll talk about that, getting off of gluten oftentimes just clears it right up. Other common culprits might be dairy or corn or soy. Those are the sort of the 4 horsemen of hidden food sensitivities, if you think of it that way. Toxins in the body. If you're exposing your body to toxins and it's trying to get rid of it through the skin. So I'm talking about environmental toxins. I'm talking about the toxins that we get when we eat processed and refined foods, and talking about preservatives and flavorings and colorings. And so if you're eating foods that have numbers on the ingredient list or have names that you can't pronounce, you know what? They're not food. They don't belong in your body. So sometimes to help help with the skin issue, we'll try to eliminate those foods, but also sometimes doing some liver support with an herb like milk thistle will help the liver be more efficient at getting rid of the junk, and then the body doesn't have to resort to using the skin as an organ of elimination, and it'll dry it up. It'll fix this problem. Also, I want to point out that stress plays a very important role with skin in general and dry skin in particular. So again, did a whole webinar on stress, and you should pay attention to that. Teresa's saying that I take 6,000 units of vitamin D in the winter because your skin gets so dry it flakes and looks cracked. Any suggestions? Well, the vitamin D is important. Are you saying I assume you were saying because you said IUs about the vitamin D, but if you're talking about the fish oil, if you're taking 6,000 milligrams of fish oil, one of the reasons that our skin gets dry in the winter is because we get exposed to dry heat in our houses. We all have these furnaces that put heat into the house, and it dries us out. Just like if you were to put an apple in the oven and just put it in there at 110 degrees or whatever, you'd see it dry out pretty quickly. We don't do it that extremely. So number one is, Teresa, you have to drink more water. That's number one. And then number two, right, she's saying it was fish oil. And then number two is you can increase the amount of fish oil that you're taking, or it may be about the potency, or it may be that your body's not absorbing the fish oil as efficiently as we want. And that can happen again because of gut function. And so sometimes combining a plant-based digestive enzyme that includes lipase so that your body can break down that fat and absorb it more efficiently, that's it. But I'm willing to bet that it's also the water thing. And so one of the strategies that you can do is take a gallon jug and fill it with water in the morning. And your task throughout the day is to make sure that that jug is empty before the end of the day. That's one of the mechanisms of getting enough water. Another thing you do is just first thing in the morning, drink 2 or 3 big glasses of water right away. And so you've already gotten a head start on that. And, and that will help with that as well. Thanks for that question. Appreciate it. All right, let's talk about rashes a little bit. And so let's see. Inga is asking, does tea count as water? Anything that you would drink is 99.9% water anyway. So whether it's tea or juice or whatever. Now, I'm not a big fan of juice because of all the sugars that are in there. When you are eating fresh fruits and vegetables, that has water content, so that helps as well. But if you're drinking a nice herbal tea or a green tea or whatever, yes, that's mostly water, and that does count, and it does add up. Aileen is asking, doesn't caffeine dehydrate? Wouldn't one want to watch that as well as the capillary effect? And yes, you are 100% right. I really appreciate you pointing that out. Caffeine and alcohol are both dehydrating to the system. And so we want to avoid any habits that are dehydrating, especially in the winter when you have a problem like Teresa just asked, her skin getting really dry during the winter. And so avoid caffeinated foods and drinks, avoid alcoholic drinks, and increase the fluid. Okay, so let's talk about rashes a little bit. So really, if you're getting a rash, that's a function of the local immune system. You are reacting to something. Now, if it's something as simple as, well, you got exposed to poison ivy or whatever, your body's going to respond with a histamine response locally, and that's when you get a rash. And so the answer to that is obviously avoid those things. Poison ivy, just because I mentioned it, I want to mention it's kind of interesting because poison ivy does not spread underneath the skin. You do not spread poison ivy by scratching it, really, unless the resin is on the skin, and by scratching it, you're really spreading it through that mechanical scratching. But really, what happens with poison ivy is it gets on our clothes, and that resin is hard to make go away. And then we touch that clothes again, or that clothes touches other parts of our body, and that's how it spreads, even though it appears that, oh, I started itching, and then it spread somewhere else. It's really about the exposure. And there have been incidences of people having such extreme responses to poison ivy that they actually got a rash from poison ivy that was resin that was 100 years old. And so really the key, if you do get exposed to poison ivy, is to get that clothes into the washing machine with hot water right away so that you can get rid of that, the resin that may be, or the residues of the resin that may be on the clothes. But you can have a reaction to anything, and that reaction can happen internally as well. If you eat something that you're allergic to, sometimes the histamine response happens on the skin. So balancing the immune system is really, really important. One of the things that cuts down on your reaction to things that you may be allergic to is fish oil, healthy fats. It helps normalize that overzealous inflammatory response. Imbalance of the good bacteria in the gut can play a role with rashes on the skin. And so again, one of the things that you may think of if you're starting to get rashes on a regular basis, especially ones that you can't identify, it's not like you used a new laundry soap or ate a food that you hadn't eaten before. First thing you should think of is, do I have an imbalance of the good bacteria in our gut? And oftentimes taking a probiotic will help fix that. Also can have to do with toxins in the body. The rash can be the result of the skin, the body using the skin as an organ of elimination. And it can be a result of stress as well. It's been 40 minutes already, and I've been trying to blow through this a little bit. I want to spend some time talking about cancers, and especially melanoma, which is the serious cancer that many of us has concerns about. So what I want to point out is that there is likely a ton of misinformation about melanoma, the cause of melanoma, and how to avoid getting melanoma. And so I'm going to try to fix that problem here, but I have been known to say that the number one killer in this country is not heart disease, it's not diabetes, it's not cancer, it's misinformation, which leads to all of those things. And so we're going to try to dispel some myths right now. Number one question I have for you: are numbers increasing? And the chances are that they may not be increasing as much as we think, because there is a general sort of paranoia in medicine these days about melanoma. And there are a lot of misdiagnoses of non-cancerous skin lesions as being diagnosed as early stage melanoma and treated as such, meaning that they get removed surgically or whatever. If you say, oh, someone's got something on their skin and I want to remove it, insurance may not pay for it. If you say, well, that's an early melanoma, then insurance is more likely to pay for it. And that's sort of what's happened in medicine. And so the numbers may not be increasing as much as we've thought. Here's the really big question. Does sun exposure cause melanoma? Well, I want to share some facts with you that have to do with some studies and talk about that. So number one, let's talk about outdoor workers. Did you know that outdoor workers, talking about farmers and fishermen or whatever, people that work outdoor, laborers, they have a lower risk of melanoma when compared to indoor workers? If sun is the cause and sun exposure is the cause of melanoma, how is that explainable? It just doesn't make any sense. Now, why might this be? Well, what do we get from exposure to the sun, and specifically UVB rays? We get making vitamin D. And as it turns out, vitamin D plays a very, very important role with the immune system functioning the way it's supposed to. So actually, outdoor workers who are getting exposure to the sun and making vitamin D have a lower incidence of melanoma, a lower risk. Interestingly, as well, UVB does not go through window pane glass. And so indoor workers either aren't getting exposure to the sun, or if they are near the window, they're getting exposure to the damaging rays of the sun, the UVA, but not the vitamin D making exposure. And that may be why they have a higher risk of melanoma than folks that work outside. Inga's asking, what about sunburns? And that is a very important distinction. I am a very big proponent of getting appropriate exposure to the sun. And that doesn't mean overexposure. Now, what I did when I was a kid, and many of us did, which was, go to the ocean and put on baby oil and baste in the sun all day, was probably not a good idea. So sensible, proper exposure to the sun is very, very important. Overexposure to the sun. And how do you know that you've gotten an overexposure to the sun? Your skin turns red. If you get an appropriate exposure to the sun, your skin will start to darken. And what you will find is that you can get more and more exposure to the sun as the summer goes on, as your skin gets darker. That's appropriate exposure. And what helps make that more appropriate is properly moisturizing your skin, taking healthy fats, and drinking enough water under those conditions. How about the region of the body? Did you know that melanoma is more common on parts of the body that are never exposed to the sun? If sun is the cause of it, how is that the fact? How is it that you're getting a melanoma in areas that are oftentimes hidden from the sun? And then the third thing I want to ask about is melanoma survival. Did you know that melanoma sufferers who have had or do have higher levels of sun exposure are much less likely to actually die from the melanoma than patients with melanoma who don't get sun exposure do? And again, it comes back to vitamin D, and it's protective. So what's the common factor here? As I said, it's vitamin D. And we are all D deficient. And your blood test of vitamin D is probably the most important blood test that you can get, more important than cholesterol. And I did a whole webinar about vitamin D. I would encourage you to learn more about it. But the blood tests and the reference ranges that were given from the labs are low. They're artificially low. And so even though the blood test may say that 30 or 32 is acceptable, it is not. And you want to get your vitamin D range up into the 50 or 60 range Teresa's got a question here that says, I've heard that you should get 20 minutes of sun a day. Is that too little or too much? For light-skinned people, 20 minutes of sun exposure on their trunk, not just their arms or legs, but their trunk, you will make about 10,000 units of vitamin D. But right now, Teresa, I know you're in Baltimore, the Baltimore area. If you go out and get sun exposure today, you're not making any vitamin D from it because the sun's too low in the sky. So the rule of thumb with sun exposure and vitamin D production is look at your shadow. If your shadow is longer than you are, I'm 6', 6'1", and if my shadow is more than 6'1", I'm not making any vitamin D from that sun because it's too low in the sky, and those UVB rays go through too much ozone and they get all bounced off, and none of it makes it to us. And so this time of year, you don't make any vitamin D where we are here and north. And I know that we've got folks in Colorado listening as well. Same deal for you guys. Okay, so what about sunscreen? And this is really, I think, a very important thing to understand. And I think that we may be making a grievous mistake because what we're doing is actually stopping the making of vitamin D from our sun exposure. And if there is a link between sun exposure and melanoma, and we see that going up, if those numbers are indeed going up, it is likely because we're using sunscreen. People go outdoors more. They get this false idea that the sunscreen is protecting them and they're not making any vitamin D from that sun exposure, and that's what's making them more susceptible. Now, after having this discussion with my son, he said, well, what do I do with Ayla? That's my granddaughter, one of my granddaughters. And he said, are we not supposed to use sunscreen anymore? And Ayla's pretty fair skinned, and we don't want her to get burned. And so the thing here is to use sunscreen so we don't get overexposure to the sun and take vitamin D as a supplement. It's that simple. We can get our vitamin D from supplements as well as from exposure to the sun. And if exposure to the sun or overexposure to the sun is the only way we're going to get sun exposure, then we don't want to get overexposed. We don't want our skin to turn red. But to make up the difference, we have to take vitamin D as a supplement. And again, we want to get that blood level up into the 50 or 60 range. And so Aileen's asking, should we sunblock after an appropriate exposure, like 20 minutes? I've had sun poisoning in the past, pale skin heritage, right? And so that kind of folks should, if you're susceptible to getting burnt, you want to avoid that. That means wearing clothes. That means only getting exposure to the sun earlier in the day or later in the day. That whole mad dogs and Englishmen only mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. And taking vitamin D as a supplement is the way to make that up. Are there food sources of vitamin D? No. There are no food sources of vitamin D. People usually say, wait a second, milk has vitamin D, but milk is actually fortified with vitamin D. It's the synthetic D, and it's not enough. And so you just have to get it from exposure to the sun, or you have to get it from supplements. And it is so inexpensive to get it from supplements. When you are supplementing, again, I refer you to the webinar archives on the website, wellbeinggps.com, for the whole webinar about vitamin D for much more information and more in-depth information. But you want to use vitamin D3, which is the natural D, and 5,000 units a day is a typical dose these days. You do that for a couple months. You get your blood level checked to make sure that it's in the right range, and if not, you can adjust up or down on the dosage if you need to. It is really hard to hurt yourself with vitamin D. You have to try to hurt yourself to get too much. Let's see, Becky's saying, what about other forms of skin cancer like basal cell and squamous cell? Those are likely more related to overexposure to the sun, and again, are avoided by not getting overexposed to the sun, and those generally are not life-threatening. When you get those, they get removed, and it's not the same thing as melanoma. And so that's why I didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about that. But thanks for the question, Beck. Appreciate that. Liquid vitamin D is so easy to take. This is Aileen again, and affordable. And she says she seems to need around 10,000 units a day. Yep. So there's liquid for our kids and for us that don't swallow capsules. The capsules, the vitamin D, 5,000 units we sell. Healthy Origins, a bottle of 120 of them is like $7.50. It's a 4-month supply. Can't be any less expensive than that. Jaden's asking, what about things like warts or cold sores that are viruses? Can we do anything about them with diet and supplement? And so yes, that comes to immune function. So number one, vitamin D plays a very important role with immune function. Stress and sleep play a very important role with immune function. We all get exposed to those viruses. Someone that gets a wart thinks, oh, I touched something that someone else didn't. That's rarely the case. We're all exposed to those viruses. Some of us react to them or get affected to them, and some don't. What's the difference? Immune function. And so all of those things that affect immune function. And there are some topical things that you can use as well, local, to help with those viruses. There's a homeopathic remedy called Thuja, Thuja, Thuja occidentalis, 30x. 3 of these little pills underneath your tongue a couple times a day oftentimes makes warts go away. That's a little tidbit there. Thanks, Jaden. I appreciate that. All right, so I think I've beaten melanoma to death, hopefully. Let's talk a little bit about acne real fast. I know that we're starting to run out of time, and I don't want to impose on anybody else's time too much. If you have some questions generally, now's a good time to type them in. So let's talk about acne. So really, what acne is clogged pores. So we have these pores, and what's happening is you have the sebaceous glands, and these are glands that produce this oil that is on the skin that helps protect us from the outside world. Sometimes those pores, which also the hair shaft goes through and sweat comes out of, get clogged. And when they do, immune factors get stuck in there, and that's what ultimately is what results in a pimple. And so people think, well, that's caused by oily skin, and that oily skin happens because of hormonal changes as we start to go through puberty or our diet. But the truth is that usually it's a dry skin condition that causes sebaceous glands to try to overproduce oil to fix the problem. And so the first thing I think of with acne, and some people this just makes their head blow right off, is fish oil. And they say, wait a second, my skin's already too oily. No, it's not. It's just a response to a dry skin, actually. And when you take fish oil, you moisturize your skin properly from the inside out, and the sebaceous glands calm down. Obviously cleaning the skin, getting the unhealthy fats out of the diet. I mean, you go and eat a big thing of French fries, the result is oil on your skin. Those are inflammatory fats that you don't want in your diet. Oftentimes, what's also helping to clog those pores are the skin working as an organ of elimination, and in particular gluten. And so if you have a really bad acne in a teenager or as an adult, 2 things that I have people do right away, 3 things actually. Number 1 is get off of gluten. And so that means wheat, oat, rye, kamut, spelt, and barley. I know that can be really, really life altering for people. And once you do it, it's amazing. And I'm not saying to somebody this has to be a lifetime sentence. What I'm saying is try it for 6 to 8 weeks, but you have to be neurotic about it. There are lots of ways that the food industry hides gluten in things. And so you have to know that if you're eating something out of a package, you've got to be able to look at that ingredient list and know that is gluten containing. Number 2, get on fish oil, proper dose, proper form. My favorite one is Whole Mega by a company called New Chapter. 4 capsules a day, 2 with breakfast, 2 with dinner. And then number 3, some liver support, because this is partly your body resorting to using the skin as an organ of elimination. And so when you use some liver support like milk thistle and artichoke and turmeric, the result is liver works better, and then the need for the body to resort to use the skin as an organ of elimination goes away. And I've got a lot of teenage patients and adult patients with acne issues that they got off of gluten, got on fish oil, got on milk thistle, and their acne went away. You do that for 8 weeks, your acne all cleared up. Now you've learned something. If you say, you know what, pizza's more important to me, I understand. Have your pizza. And then you know the ramifications of those decisions, right? Taking an antibiotic for acne is backwards. Ultimately, it may clear up the acne, but it's causing other problems and ultimately setting you up for other issues down the road because it kills the bacteria on the skin that are supposed to be there. It kills the bacteria in the gut, and that imbalance will show up in other ways. And so that's never, ever, ever a good idea. Whew, that was a lot of information about skin. I really do appreciate your participation. Let me just point out that next month's webinar is going to be how to live longer. Trade secrets that science has taught us. I'm going to get into the science of longevity. And then I also want to point out again that we have our archives on our website. And so you can go to wellbeinggps.com and you can see the archive there and see all sorts of titles, including some of the ones that you see in front of you, as well as many, many others. I'd say there's probably 25 of them on there now. Lots of good topics. I also appreciate and look for your feedback. So if there's a topic that you would like to see me cover, I would love to hear about that as well. So please call me or email me. Everybody, thanks so much for spending time here. I really do appreciate it. Aileen, thanks for all your questions. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Beck, same to you. Thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the topic. And again, share this information with others, and we'll see you next month. Everybody, have a great day.